Last year, Karen, 70, approached me on FB and asked if I would take her cats and look after them. She was gonna live in a camper van with her husband after she became very wealthy with bitcoins and didn't want to stress the cats out by taking them traveling around Europe. She had rescued them like a week before they decided to go on the road, and they'd been in a cattery for the last 5 months being looked after by someone else. When she delivered the cats to our farm, she made a huge fuss. Despite sending her photos beforehand, she absolutely refused to put the cats in the enclosure we had prepared for them to stay in for the next few weeks. Nothing else was good enough either. Our dogs were too big, the house was too small, there were no street lights, we live in the country, etc. I grey rocked her the whole time, successfully put the cats in their new home, and calmed her down. She had an entire car boot full of brand new cat accessories like little harnesses and weird outfits. Farm cats don't wear tutus. And she cheered up a bit when we made the right noises despite the ridiculousness. Then her husband turned up in the camper van that looked like the tour bus of a major rock band. It was huge and fancy. Then she suddenly turned up the volume, started wailing and crying for her poor kitty babies, and her husband pandered to her the whole time, wiping away the tears with his hands and supporting her as she half collapsed on the driveway. Eventually they leave, and the next morning they're posting pictures of themselves sipping champagne at the beach. Over the next few months, we regularly sent updates to Karen with cute pictures of the cats, and she always replies with how grateful she is that we're looking after them, but she never writes to us to ask how they're doing. Even when our area is hit by a natural disaster. At some point, she planned to visit them, but it rained, so despite coming all the way to our remote town, she just kept driving. Whenever we posted pictures of the cats on FB, she would always comment about her cats. Last month, I wrote to her and said the cats were doing well, but they were suffering from the cold a bit and spending all day on the couch by the fire. She replied with instructions I should be keeping them warmer and making sure I'm looking after them. I gave a non-committal response. Yesterday, I wrote to Karen to tell her one of the cats was critically ill after being sideswiped by a tractor. I had been up all night keeping her alive, and now she was at the vet's awaiting life-saving surgery. Next thing, my phone blows up. It's Karen's husband screaming down the line asking me, "What exactly am I getting out of upsetting Karen all the time with my messages?" I tried to answer, but obviously he hadn't called to listen. He proceeded to tell me I was a sadist, a bully, and an abuser, and that Karen had given us the cats, so why am I upsetting her with these messages when she's moved on? I apologized for any offense given and tried to explain that I only thought she would want to know since they were her cats originally and she loves them so much. His answer to that was to demand I delete Karen's number from my phone and never contact her again because she wasn't interested, and not to give any more updates on the cats. I said, "Okay, sorry, I will no longer contact you about the cats," and then he hung up. 3 hours later, I get a message from Karen all about how terrible this is for her. She can't cope with the thought of the cat being ill, and it's not her husband's fault for shouting. He's just trying to protect her from this unbearable pain. I told her I thought it was really unkind of her husband to shout at me since I'm in the middle of a pet crisis, and I was only trying to do the right thing by keeping her informed. She called me a selfish prick, hung up, and blocked me straight away. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to tell her that since the cats are still legally registered in her name, she is liable for their expenses and that the vet scanned the chip as soon as we arrived. We often bring in stray animals, so he knows not every animal we bring in belongs to us, and it was her name that came up. I guess we'll cross that bridge later. In the meantime, the cat is doing well, and we hope she lives because she's part of our family, and we certainly haven't moved on. Thank you for taking such good care of the kitten cats. You're a good person. I'm sorry you have to be in the receiving end of any nonsense from her and her husband. To protect yourself from the inevitable lawsuit that's coming your way, make sure to save copies of all communication with regards to the cats, voicemail, email, social media posts, texts, etc. Save a few copies in different places, like email them to yourself, print multiple hard copies, and save in different locations like your car, in the house, maybe a filing cabinet or a drawer at work, etc. She's gonna come at you for the medical bills. I will be shocked if she doesn't. Make sure to check her, the husband's, and any close family members' social media for posts and comments about the cat. She sounds like the type of person who will spread lies and fan the flames to get social media sympathy points. The most important thing is that you take care of yourself and the kitten cats. Everything else will sort itself out. Good luck, and please keep us updated on the kitty's health and specifically the surgery. If you feel like it, please update on Karen's handling of the situation. The actual story from these terrible people that I'm picking up on is Karen adopted cats without the consent or probably knowledge of her husband, and husband convinced her to give them away to allow someone else to look after them. Fortunately, it sounds like it's much harder to abandon a registered animal in Spain than it is here in the US, which is probably why he got mad at you and told you to lose Karen's number. In his mind, the cats are now 100% your responsibility, and if you just stop sharing updates with Karen, she'd stop crying about her cats. I hope that the cats can eventually get re-registered under your name, because it's awful to think there's a chance you would have to turn them back over to the people who have no business owning animals. Next story. Dramatis personae. MK equals male Karen, me equals me. Manager equals manager. Waitresses and other customers. This happened about 10 or 15 years ago when I worked in a very famous city in England, not London, but it was the de facto capital in the past. I was a regular visitor to a famous chain of pizza restaurants whose name implies it is a fast food restaurant. I've been to lots of different restaurants in this chain all over the country, and all of them are brilliant. It was in July or August, I think. It was a very warm summer's evening, perhaps 7 p.m. This particular restaurant is in what had been some important river house. Not quite sure what that means, but it was by the river, by a bridge, and 400 yards from one of the most famous buildings in the world. It was a major tourist destination for all nationalities. Because it was warm, the outside terrace was being used. The terrace was literally just by the river, a few feet above water level. I, male, late 40s at the time, was given a table and soon received my usual Montepulciano, red wine, olives, and sun-dried tomatoes, my usual wine, and nibbles, whilst I decided which pizza to order. I was sipping my wine and nibbling my nibbles, watching the boats go by, but my peace and the peace of everybody else outside was shattered when MK looked about 60-ish, demanded of a waitress to see the manager. Manager comes out, looks 30-ish, and had hard worked. I forgot the exact dialogue, but it was along the lines of, "Manager, can I help you, sir?" MK, not quite angrily, but still quite rudely, "We've been sitting here waiting our food for about nearly 10 minutes now." Manager, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, MK, why don't we have our food? We're hungry. Are your staff incompetent? Etc, etc, etc. Manager, once entitled MK shut his cake hole. "I'll go and speed up your food order, sir." MK grunts. The MK had gone on for a lot longer than that, but that's just the general gist. The manager obviously looks harassed and a bit upset as he turns from MK's table to go back inside. Now, this isn't a fast food restaurant despite its name, and the staff don't hurry customers who are clearly there for a leisurely meal. If MK had just asked his waitress nicely if she could hurry his meal, he'd have got what he wanted. Anyway, I was annoyed at MK's entitlement, rudeness to staff. Literally all of the staff in the branch of that restaurant are friendly, helpful, polite, and everything you'd want in restaurant staff, and this branch was no exception. And the fact that he spoiled for lots of people a lovely evening by the river. So, me, as manager, is just passing me. "Excuse me, are you the manager?" Manager stops and thinks, "Oh no, not another." "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" Me, speaking quite loudly but calmly, not to put the manager down, but so that MK and everybody else on the terrace could hear me clearly. I did make it sound as though it was a complaint initially, but then, "I've been to many branches of this restaurant all over the country," and slightly raising my voice for emphasis, "this has to be my favorite branch. It's fantastic. It's a beautiful location by the river. I'm watching the boats go by. It's a lovely, warm, and clear evening." I indicate the general vista with a gentle sweep of my arm. I'm relaxing with a nice glass of wine and my favorite nibbles. I indicate nibbles and wine. Your staff are all taking really good care of me. It's fantastic. Thank you. That's the general gist of what I said, and I finished my long speech, not sure how long it took, but probably 30 seconds or so. It takes a moment or two for the manager to realize I've finished and that it's not a complaint, it's just the opposite. Anti-complaint? Manager, brightening up as what I've said fully registers. "Thank you, sir, thank you very much." He then went off with a smile and a spring in his step. There was not cheering or high fives, this is England, but I'm sure everybody else on the terrace agreed with me. All of this time, MK had not looked around or reacted. There's no way he didn't hear me, and I'm guessing his poor wife was embarrassed. I hope it was clear to everybody that there was a subtext to what I said. MK is a dipwad, ignore him. What I said to the manager was 100% true. It's a fabulous restaurant with brilliant staff. People are very quick to make complaint, but I wonder how many people do anti-complaints. Most people are polite, but I don't think we compliment as much as we should. MK said nothing at all to me at any time. He probably knew I'd tell him he was an ignorant plonker to his face. He was the type to be abusive to those who can't answer back, but won't say a word to anybody he knows won't take his nonsense. Unfortunately, we have a lot of his type in England. The restaurant is still there in the same place. I no longer live in that city nor work there, but I do visit every year or two, and the staff are still brilliant. Asterisk. There were river taxis and those long, thin rowing boats where half a dozen people sit in line. Sorry, I don't know what they're called, like those in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. It was nice to sit back, sip my wine watching them all. Next story. For some context, my father's wife is very manipulative. She was my mom's best friend at the time and had an affair with my dad when she was in the hospital. She managed to manipulate my whole family. Grandpa was the sweetest person on earth. He was always nice to everyone and was treating every granddaughter the same. Sadly, he was diagnosed with liver cancer in 2015, and when he beat cancer, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2018, which resulted in him almost becoming blind. In July of 2019, I turned 19 and was staying at my grandma's place for summer vacation. Entitled stepmother told me my grandpa's immune system was resetted, a simple cold could end up killing him, and I shouldn't visit him. My grandpa called, telling me how lonely he was and I should visit him, regardless of what she told me, so I did, and I was glad I did because it was the last time I saw him alive. Stepmother told me if my grandpa should feel worse, she would tell us, but she never did. A month later, Grandpa moved into my dad's house. My dad is a truck driver, so he wasn't around most time, making entitled stepmother and her kids her caretakers. And in September, he died, 2 weeks before his 56th birthday. They didn't even call us to tell us he was doing worse or that he even died. Another relative called us to tell us he passed away, and I was filled with sadness over his death and anger that she lied right to my face. I was talking to my grandma complaining why they would do that, but I knew all along. My sister and I were dad's kids with my mom, not her kids. A week after his death was the date of his funeral. My sister and I went to my grandma's, and my grandma begged me to not cause any trouble or arguments, that she understands why I'm upset, but it was Grandpa's funeral. We walked into the church and we wanted to sit down in the first row, but entitled stepmother said no. When we asked why, she said, because I want it like that. So we sat down in the second row. You know who sat down in the first row? My grandpa's niece, who traveled from Russia to Germany for his funeral. She was very close to him and they constantly video chatted. Understandable that she's sitting there. I also get why my father, this entitled B, and my half-sister, her child, were sitting there. My stepsisters sat in the first row, which was okay, but why the frick were their partners who didn't even know him sitting there? I was furious. My grandma whispered into my ear, "Please do as she says." I know, but it's his funeral. Don't cause a scene. I sat down behind my dad. The funeral began and entitled stepmother organized the whole funeral. The preacher started talking. He was only talking about my half-sister, and my stepsisters. The only thing I heard was half-sister here, half-sister there. Not a single word about his other 3 granddaughters, my cousin, my sister, and I, even though he loved all of us the same. She made it all about her family. I was crying and raging. After the preacher stopped talking, everyone was allowed to say their final goodbyes to him. I went to his closed coffin, put my hand on it. "Grandpa, miss you, and I love you. Don't forget that ever, and I'm sorry for what I'm about to do." I don't know how it works in other countries, but after funerals, everyone eats meals in a restaurant. We weren't even invited to sit next to our grieving father, so I sat next to my sister, grandma, and my grandcousins. After I had enough, I went to their table and said to them, "See you guys in hell again." My father was shocked and entitled B screamed, "Leave now!" I took my sister and we went outside. Entitled the oldest stepsister went outside to scream at my and my sister, "Your father is a great father." Spoiler, he's not. He didn't do anything. "Yeah, for you he's a great dad." And then started blaming and guilt-tripping us. "You never called. You're to blame. You should have stayed in contact. You're the bad ones." I screamed back, "You lied to us." She went back inside. My sister was crying. She was 15 at the time. She didn't do anything. And I was furious with my stepsister for screaming at my sister for something I have said. Prior to that, I tried to have a relationship with my dad and his family, but they didn't call us when Grandpa became sicker and weaker, and didn't even call us when he died. Probably because they don't want us around. That's why we weren't mentioned in the preacher's speech. We didn't even know that Grandpa moved to live at their house until a friend of ours, who was my grandpa's neighbor at that time, told us. I've had no contact since that to my father and his family. Maybe I should add that at the time I was on heavy antidepressants. I kind of regret the see you in hell part, even though it wasn't sassy AF, but I don't regret the no contact part. I never felt any better without being around this entitled and manipulating piece of dirt. It resulted in having a better relationship with my mom. We never argued after that. But there was no one around to manipulate me in arguing with her. Edit. I forgot to mention that my stepsister at that time was 25 years old, and she screamed at a 15-year-old grieving girl who had nothing to do what her 19-year-old sister did, and my sister never got an apology from her. Wow, your step-family sounds very abusive and toxic. Don't worry, your grandpa knows you love him. I wouldn't be surprised if they were abusive towards him before he passed. I don't think you were out of place saying what you do to them. Just ensure that they don't get their greedy hands on any inheritance that you may get.